A biblical perspective on life, culture and current events. This is 2020 on Vision.
Well, Greg Bondar is National Director of Christian Voice Australia. He's the national spokesperson. It's a national think tank and advocacy group for families, liberty and faith. Been doing some creative thinking around the Olympics. Greg, a special welcome back to 2020.
Oh, thank you for the invitation, Neil. Delighted to be with you as usual.
Hey, well, we're about to get underway with the Paralympics, so there's a little bit more of a focus back on things that we might reflect on. You've been having, I guess, in some sense, even though these are serious issues, a little bit of fun with the thought of some medal awards for a woke Olympics. Give us your insight here.
Yeah, thank you, Neil. Look, a couple of colleagues and I from church got together and were saying, look, the Olympics has proven itself to be the sporting field, bad taste, disrespect for people of faith, and of course it turned out to be the winner of the best in woke sport. So what we did was had a look at what's actually happened during the Olympics, Neil, and we've come up with a bronze, silver and gold medal for the most woke actions that occurred during the Olympics. Now,
okay. So you've come up with Greg. You've come up with a gold, a silver, and a bronze. And I wonder whether, if we're going to announce those now, we might start with the bronze medal. Who do you think the bronze medal goes to in the woke Olympics?
Yeah, look, I apologise for any lightheartedness, but look, the bronze medal goes to Algeria's Imane Khalif for competing as a male in a women's boxing competition, Neil. So we think that he or she has won the bronze medal, but in particular he. So because quite frankly, Neil, it's showing again that people cannot understand that there are only two genders and you're either a male or a female. So the bronze medal goes to Algeria's Imane Khalif, Neil. Now, you ready for the silver medal, Neil?
Hang on, let's just talk about Imane just for a moment here, because he is, or she is, a significantly controversial character, and as so many have categorised her as he, and they've been able to, in some ways, paint one way or another, but, in some sense, there is a certain disorder that Imane Khalif is said to have, which puts her in that sort of unique category of having those XY chromosomes as a male, but having all the other parts of a female, apart from the fact that, the obvious look of masculinity when she is in the ring. So in some sense, we always talk about these people as ones who need our compassion, but certainly there is a real issue there. And I know that that while there's a sensitivity to these sorts of things, I know that listeners can hear exactly what you're saying there, and we might all agree that she ought not to have been fighting in the female category. So that's a challenging thought, but that disorder sort of creates all sorts of confusion. Any thoughts around that?
Yeah, Neil, I do actually. Look, I quite frankly recognise the disorder, and I identify with the problem because I've heard of it before. The issue here is that Imane Khalif should not have been in the women's category for this particular sport. Unfair advantage, both physically and otherwise. And I think that, quite frankly, deserves the bronze medal, Neil.
Okay, there's a bronze medal there, that's right. And I think there's not going to be too many listening to our conversation now is going to disagree with you. It's been a real challenge, that issue from the Olympic Games. Hey, that's the bronze. Who gets the silver in your woke Olympic medal tally?
Well, I'm absolutely staggered to have read and found out, and I wanted to try and contact them, but 6 Christians were arrested for driving a bus. They were from the United Kingdom and a couple of other countries, for driving a bus in France and through Paris with a sign on the bus that said, "Stop attack on Christians." In other words, criticising the opening ceremony. So they actually spent a night in jail, Neil, for driving a bus that said, "Stop attack on Christians." Now, you've got to say that's pretty close to a gold, but unfortunately it's only won a silver. Now, how ridiculous it is when we can't even express our own faith or belief or opinion. So this has been a real issue because I think it, quite frankly, sends a very sour message to all Christians, Neil.
And those 6 Christians who went through that ordeal of being arrested and spending time in custody. 6 Christians from Citizen Go. And that's, with all of the protests that happen on streets everywhere, and here you've just got a bus driving through the streets, doesn't even sound like any sort of threatening type of protest. It's just getting a message out there. So a silver medal there in the woke allocation of some medals. Okay, we're on the edge of our seat. Who is your gold medal contender?
Oh, look, Neil, you've got it. This is a hard decision, but it has to be the gold medal to the opening ceremony because take no, lighthearted or not, but this is an absolute offence to all Christians. The highly sexualised scene imitating Leonardo da Vinci's sacred painting of the Last Supper of Christ featured as part of the opening ceremony. Neil, this has got to be the most offensive thing that I have ever seen, and I don't care how you try and justify it. It's nothing more than mocking Christianity, Neil. So they've won the gold medal, the opening ceremony.
Okay. And of course, this is where we might pause and listen to the French national anthem. I don't know whether you think that France is actually embarrassed by this or whether it's just the Olympics Committee or who's to blame for the wokeness of that opening ceremony. It certainly does reflect poorly on the French, and some have reflected that maybe, the very secularised state of the French might actually this might be just a symptom of what happens when that's so secularised. Any thoughts here about who ought to be embarrassed around that?
Yeah, absolutely, Neil. It's interesting because the French made it perfectly clear that there would be absolutely no religious advertising or symbolism whatsoever. But they didn't make it clear that there could be anti-Christian symbolising or activity. And it's really contradictory. So I think France has got a lot to answer for here in terms of, allowing this to happen. Because, Neil, you remember Elon Musk? We spoke about him last week being a cultural Christian, I think a couple of weeks ago. He said this, and I got to agree with him. Unless there is more bravery to stand up for what is fair and right, Christianity will perish, Neil. And that's where we're at the moment.
So France and the IOC, in the way that they've deliberated on these things, actually created a permission to attack Christians. And there were those who were waiting in the wings who decided they couldn't resist the opportunity, and certainly that happened in that opening ceremony. Gold, silver and bronze, well done and good creative thinking there. And, as you say, to make a little bit light of it because these are serious issues, but gold, silver and bronze medals. Hey, let's talk about some of the other things you've been thinking through, Greg. You've been thinking, what is the role of the church? Give us your insight here.
Yeah, thank you, Neil. Look, this came up. I've just returned back from Cambodia, Neil, where I met with about 20 Christian leaders from the Asian countries. And, the role of the church came up in our discussion. What is it that the church does? And I bet if you ask your leader or anybody else, what does it do? The common, responses you're likely to get would be something along the line, well, a church is, a building. So we've got to differentiate between what is a church and what is the role of the church. So what is the role of the church? Is it a place of worship only? Sunday school, or is it a food bank drive? I mean, we've got to make sure that we understand what the role of the church is. And you and I both know that, the Bible calls the church the body of Christ in Ephesians 5. So if that's what a church is, what is its role, Neil? And I'd be interested to hear your opinion as well, because quite frankly, I think there's a lot of misconception by Christians on what the role of the church is.
Well, there's some immediate thoughts come to mind, and one of these is something that we might talk about in coming times, and that is the thought that there are even churches around the world who are taking the name church out of their title. And there's going to be lots to say about that, I think, in the coming days. But there's almost, for some, an embarrassment about using the word church in the title of your gathering. And that's pretty challenging. And that happens. And I think I'm just remembering this reflection now coming from the UK, and I think it was the Church of England. A lot of churches taking that word church out of their name, but also in Pentecostal churches, a lot of Pentecostal churches don't use the word church. So there's something there, I think, that's brewing for a conversation sometime into the future. But of course, the body of Christ is the church, and Greg, if I was just being thoughts off the top of my head, those who identify as Christian believers align themselves with the image of Christ. And in aligning themselves with the image of Christ, they pursue what he said we ought to pursue, and that is his mission. So that's what the church is. Those who are on a mission, who identify and align with their identity in Christ. And you can talk then. We could get into all sorts of things about what the mission is. But you give us your insight here. Yeah,
Neil, you make a good point. The point I want to make is that we all go to church on a Sunday. We all feel refreshed. We all feel spiritually uplifted. You know, we've had fellowship, but we seem to forget Matthew 28, Neil. Matthew 28 is the church's marching orders, and quite frankly, the mission of the church is to take Jesus to all men. And I think we have to ask ourselves, Neil, you know, is the church fulfilling that role of teaching, training and developing those people who are Christians to then go out and fulfill the mission of taking Jesus to all men? Now, you've got to ask yourself, half the world still has not heard the gospel. So, Neil, we've got to ask ourselves, has the church fulfilled its role? And that's the question I'm asking. You know, what is the role of the church, Neil? For me, it's Matthew 28, the Great Commission debate. Yeah.
And, of course, you know, we put ourselves into the picture, don't we? And we might ask ourselves that question individually. Am I going? Or am I giving? I mean, those are the sorts of two options you have there. You know, some people called to go and able to go. Others, well, we have the opportunity to be able to give. And in sending some dollars to go along with the mission, we actually then are participants. We're stakeholders then, aren't we, in the mission? So it's as good as going if you can give. But, of course, there are those who are called to go. And, of course, the Matthew 28 Great Commission, of course, that is going to be a part of who we are as a body of believers. And to be able to reflect on that just gives us some level of understanding, even if it is just the first base in understanding what our purpose is as we are believers and serving Christ. Okay, anything more to add on that, Greg?
Yeah, just a quick one, Neil. Don't forget that when I say taking Jesus to all men, what I'm talking about here, Neil, is very quickly is, you know, your mission field is your own home, your work colleagues, your social gathering. So are you taking Jesus to everyone is the point I'm trying to make. Not just going to church on a Sunday, feeling refreshed and spiritually fulfilled. The role of the church is to make. We're all trained to go out there and spread the gospel as we should. So, Neil, your mission field starts right at home and, of course, goes internationally as well.
Let's come back to some politics here for a few moments. The religious discrimination bill, you think that Albo is going to default and he's not going to bring any sort of protection for Christian freedoms, and it may be because either he's been too slow to act or he might have been running out of time even in this particular session of Parliament. What are your thoughts here about Albo and our religious discrimination bill that he has been sitting on but not making public?
Yeah, Neil, you make a good point, and as I tell you now, I'm happy to take a dinner for two bet with anybody that this bill will not get through. Albo will default on the religious discrimination bill. It's been well laid out. The inquiry we had by the Australian Law Reform Commission was what I call a smokescreen. It was merely there to delay time. Yes, it came up with a lot of things which the church itself didn't agree on. There were so many disparaging views, and not only that, Neil, the church couldn't agree on what should and should not be in there. Neil, the bill will not get passed, and don't forget, the bill is not about granting unlimited freedoms. It's preventing adverse treatment of religious individuals and organisations. Neil, I'm happy to take your lunch or have a bet with anybody, but this bill will not get through in the time that we have left.
Okay, the time that we have left. Here we are. It's already past mid-August, and there were speculations earlier on that maybe even there could be an early election even before the end of this year. I'm sure that could be a possibility. I'll get your thoughts on that. You're the number cruncher, and you like to look at these things very carefully as a political commentator. Give us your insights here, because he's not likely to bring this religious discrimination bill to the fore. And as I mentioned there even at the start, maybe he's run out of time to do that. What are your thoughts about timing for a federal election, or whether there is even a possibility that that religious discrimination bill could even come up either this year or early next year?
Yeah, Neil, good point. Look, I've been doing some number crunching, and we have to have an election on or before the 17th or 24th of May next year. Now, time is running out. Now, there could be a House and a half Senate election before October this year, or by October this year, but that's unlikely to happen because there have been a lot of redistributions, there have been a lot of state and territory elections going on, as you know, in your own state. So what we've got is the government could go to May 2025. Now, if you take out Christmas and New Year and Easter and the holidays and the parliamentary sitting days, which are almost non-existent because they don't sit for long, Neil, there's not going to be enough time to get this bill into Parliament and get it passed. And don't forget that Albo said, we'll go through with it as long as the opposition agree. Well, Neil, I'm in Canberra on Thursday this week. I'm having discussions with a certain number of people because this bill will not happen. And again, it's almost a mirror image of, Morrison's position where the bill never got through, Neil.
So Albo's expectation of bipartisanship to go forward with this, and the opposition's reluctance to go along with that line, this is part of the problem here. So it's not going to go forward unless there's some sort of bipartisanship. And there's this also this thought that says that, the government has an opportunity to then blame the opposition for not having a religious freedom bill here. Come back to this for a moment before we end our conversation. And, preventing adverse treatment of religious individuals and organisations. I mean, some of us might be thinking, how hard is this to do? Because coming up with a whole bill and, there's all sorts of complexities, there's all sorts of wording that can go wrong in all of that. There's all sorts of bad things that can happen, as we experienced under the previous government, where we almost lost Christian schooling in the stroke of a pen. But these prevention of the adverse treatment of religious people, of Christian believers, of organisations, that's just something that ought to be added on to there somehow that says you can't do this. I don't know how hard that can be, Greg.
Yeah, Neil, I totally agree with you. And as you said in your introduction, have a look at the church and state issue where, there was no acknowledgement of the country. Christians are again under attack. Now, if you can't express your own faith, then that's why we need a protection for religious individuals and organisations, because Dave Pellew, of course, is now suffering the consequences of not having a Religious Discrimination Act.
Well, Greg, always appreciate your insights. Thanks so much for delivering those today. Greg Bondar is National Spokesperson for the Christian Voice Australia. It's a national think tank and advocacy group for families, liberty and faith. Sometimes we're talking to Greg and he's wearing his other hat, Every Home for Christ. And Greg, always appreciate you. There is a website you can go to connect with Christian Voice Australia, christianvoiceaustralia.blog. christianvoiceaustralia.blog. Greg Bondar, thanks so much for joining us again today on 2020.
Every blessing, Neil, and thank you very much for having me on.
Thanks for taking time to listen to this audio on demand from Vision Christian Media. To find out more about us, go to vision.org.au.